Good afternoon, this is the Rhetoric Week Viva. I hope that you had a wonderful Christmas and that you were able to spend a lot of great time with your family, but here we go into the Viva. This week's Viva question is, according to Plato, why should men strive to lead a just life? In his book The Republic, Plato presents a counter-argument to the argument that justice is basically the will of the powerful, because whoever has the power can therefore dictate what justice is. But Plato disagrees, and he's going to spend this entire book showing why he disagrees and what he views justice as. And our thesis is, the just life is better than the unjust life. That is his basic premise for this book. And the 3 points we're going to look at are why the unjust life is not worth living, why the just life is a happier life, and why the just life is the more pleasurable life. First off, we're going to look at why the unjust life is not worth living. Justice can have many, many different meanings, especially today. It's a very controversial topic in many different circles. And Plato, in his book The Republic, is basically going to spend this entire book defining what justice is inherently. And he uses the character Socrates, which he includes in his book, to put forth his ideas. And as Socrates and his friends are traveling, they meet someone and go to stay at his house. And this man basically defines justice as living up to your obligations and being honest. But Socrates disagrees with this definition of justice. He thinks that justice is far more complex to be simply defined like that. Socrates thought that justice is about creating harmony with the different aspects of yourself so that you can live in a balance with yourself. And Plato devotes the rest of the books to using Socrates to help show how to obtain that perfect balance. In order to do this, he says, we must imagine ourselves as a city, and then he goes further to divide the mind into 3 governing parts: logic, emotion, and desire. Justice, Socrates said, was the rule of reason or logic over the other 2. And when the other men heard this argument, they quickly agreed that it became apparent that justice is far more preferable than the unjust life when it rules with reason. To quote an excerpt from the Republic, quote, "I think justice belongs in the best class, that which should be loved for its own sake and for the consequences by anyone who's going to be blessed," unquote. Plato compares the 3 classes of people with his 3 governing forces. Since, he argues, politics is driven by emotion, there should be an emotionless class of philosophers over everybody else to help make decisions for them. In this way, he thought that the evils of a pure democracy could be avoided. He wanted a balance, which is what we're going for, a balance that would at the same time push for success, but at the same time realize your limits. And he argued that this balance would make you happier, which leads us into our second point: the just life is the happier life. Socrates argues that the just life is happier because reason rules in their souls. Unlike this, the unjust are unhappy because they are enslaved to their desires. Glaucon, who is Socrates' main opponent in this book, argues that men are only just when they are watched. He said that a just man immediately becomes unjust whenever he is not watched, and he uses the example of a ring, and he said that if a just man was given a ring that made him invisible, he would immediately become the same as the unjust man. He argues that a just man is only really just out of necessity, and becomes unjust whenever it is safe. But Socrates responds by declaring that justice does not derive from being watched. A man who uses such a ring has only enslaved himself to it. A truly just man would not use it. To quote a further excerpt from the Republic, quote, "The best and most just and happiest person is the most kingly, the one who most rules like a king over himself," unquote. In order to control emotion and desire, one can look to characters from stories. Pericles, for example, whom we've touched on other Vivas, he said that happiness depends on being free, and being free depends on being courageous. We should also be just, not only because it will make us happier, but we also need to regulate the kind of art that we are intaking to really experience happiness. And the final point we're going to look at is why the just life is the more pleasurable life. Socrates argues that the just life is the more pleasurable, not because it has more pleasure, but because the just life is happier and also turns out to have more pleasure than the unjust life. But what is the difference between pleasure and happiness? Well, to quote Dr. Enright, quote, "Hedonia is what we take from the world to be happy. We call it pleasure. Eudaimonia is what we give to the world to give us happiness. We call it happiness." Unquote. Socrates argues that the soul gets its truest pleasure when reason rules. The just life, then, is not only first in happiness, but it is also more pleasurable than the unjust life. So now, in both ways, the just life is better than the unjust life. So, in conclusion, in his book The Republic, Plato makes the argument that to live a just life is better than the unjust life. His 3 reasons for this are that the unjust life is not worth living, a just life is happier, and that the just life is more pleasurable. These are his answers to what is justice, which remains a controversial topic today. Thank you.